Hi, this is Dan Devlin for the Detective Dan Devlin Show, Honorable People, Honorable Nation. And I know that you've heard this before if you've been watching us. We do not believe you can have an honorable nation if you don't have honorable people. Our program today is going to be really about several topics, but it centers around current events, and one of those events is the Kavanaugh hearings before the Senate in regards to a Supreme Court nomination. If you've been watching that hearing in the committee, you've really watched what is going to be happening to most nominees in the future unless we change the way we do business. Just to go into it a little bit for those of you who haven't been following it very closely, there is a woman by the name of Christine Blasi Ford, who has claimed that the individual who's seeking office assaulted her when he was 17 years old and they were in high school. And I believe it was 35 or 36 years ago when this occurred. And as she describes the so-called assault, Brett Kavanaugh apparently, according to her memory, had been drinking, got on top of her, and whether the word was groped or whatever it is, his hands were in areas that they probably shouldn't have been if she didn't want that. And she claims that he made an attempt to remove some of her clothing. Apparently, that's as far as it went, and she eventually left the so-called party. And here, 35, 36 years later, she brings this up because she says that she has a civic duty to keep him from getting on the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, you should know that he is already a sitting judge on what may be the second highest court in the country. And I want you to realize that apparently Ms. Ford, as I'll refer to her as Ms. Ford at this point, apparently she didn't have this civic responsibility before now. It was never reported to the police. Witnesses that she claims were at that party say that they have no memory of it. Whether that's out of convenience or whether that's actually true, I don't know that anyone will know. But I want to talk about the idea of repressed memory, which is supposedly part of the claim here. She didn't remember this, and through an analyst that she has, these memories started coming back to her. And it appears as though initially the memories were of the so-called assault, and then sometime later the name Brett Kavanaugh became associated with that assault. Ms. Blasi Ford, or Ms. Ford, whichever you choose, doesn't know the location, doesn't know the time. She is absolutely positive that she only had one beer, which seems interesting. And I'm doing this recording because the hearings have been lopsided. They have been one-sided, and people have been very gentle with Ms. Ford, who, by the way, I believe she indicated that she has a doctorate in one field and 2 master's degrees. So this is not an individual who cannot figure things out. She's an individual who seems as though she's very much a victim, and her presentation some people call compelling. But because of the male-female atmosphere in society today, men find themselves in a position where they cannot win in an argument when it comes to things involving females, especially when it comes to areas of quote-unquote sexual behavior or sexual assault. The hearings were very easy as far as questioning where it comes to Ms. Ford. She admitted a number of things, such as there was an excuse used for her not coming to testify before the committee because she has a fear of flying. Yet, through her own admission, she flies often and far. And I believe that includes to Hawaii, which is no short trip. So there appears to be some things, and I'd love to have the time to go through this extensively. But there are some areas that we need to explore that everybody's afraid of. Men and women think differently, they act differently, they behave differently oftentimes. And men are forced in the position of having to approach women in a very sensitive way, otherwise that they will be condemned for being too hard or not understanding, not being gentle with a female, especially if she is claiming sexual assault. I've done a program on some of this before, and you may recall that I personally investigated, and I'll refer to one rape case in particular, where the woman actually went out and, according to her statement, when she claimed that a particular individual who she knew actually raped her and beat her, struck her, did relatively serious damage to her physically. And when she had the encounter with the police, she was bruised and scratched and had obviously been struck with something in the face. And many officers believed, okay, let's go out and arrest this guy. But in developing a rapport with this woman, young lady, I was honest enough with her to let her know the repercussions of what she was alleging occurred. And part of that is that if she is lying, she could be in trouble and maybe even charged for filing a false police report and making these false accusations. But the truth is what is important in a police investigation. And in pursuing exactly what happened, eventually she decided to tell what she says is the actual truth, which was that she went out into the desert, which this took place in Arizona. She used branches and twigs to scratch her arm. She ripped her clothes. She struck herself in the face and then went and claimed that she was raped. And when I asked, why did you do that? She admitted that she really liked this male, this young man. And he was not responding to her advances. So as a result, she did this, knowing that she could send this man to prison for an extended period of time. And it may have been possible that he would spend 10, 15, 20 years in prison when he, in reality, had done nothing. I tell you that story because people at this hearing have said that Ms. Ford gives a credible testimony and that she has no reason to lie. That is in her mind, whether she has a reason to lie or not. No one pursued the avenue that, did she actually like Brett Kavanaugh? Did that have anything to do with her thinking about him? We know that we all have dreams, we all have fantasies where we think about things that we might like to have happen. We know that some women have dreams about being raped, when, of course, it never really occurred. Why is that? I can't explain those things. Maybe Ms. Ford could explain some of those things, because I believe that's her field of study. I believe that she's a professor, whether it's in psychology, I believe that's what it is. But she knows probably more about how people think than most of the population. That also could be used in order to make her case. Why might she say this? People don't want to address it, but it's true that we know the opponents, in this case the Democrats, do not want Mr. Kavanaugh to be on the Supreme Court because of his conservative views. They've made statements that would indicate that that is true. But we, as spectators, people who should be calling for a fair hearing, many people are being convinced by some of the people on that committee that Ms. Ford obviously has to be telling the truth, and Brett Kavanaugh obviously has to be lying. I'll take this approach here where it comes to lying. Lying is often in the mind of the individual who is being accused of lying. We all know that we can say something and we can believe it, and yet it can still not be true. How can that be? I gave an example earlier today of swearing that I was in a particular location on a particular date at a particular time. And I could swear to that because that's what I believe. And yet I could leave that questioning and I could go out and I could stop and think about it and I say, oh, wait a minute. That was close to my birthday. That couldn't have been that date. It had to be a date different. And the question is, did I lie? Or did I give what I believed was the best information at the time? And again, the examiner, the investigator, would have to determine for him or herself whether they believed I intentionally did that. Is it an untruth? I would give you that. But it is not necessarily a lie. At parties, when you have alcohol, any adult knows, and even younger people would know, that it alters our perception of things. When you're at a party, oftentimes there are things going on, people are fooling around, they're maybe even making sexual advances to people, maybe a kiss here and there, maybe an arm around someone, and that may be acceptable behavior. But obviously there is some behavior that is unacceptable. Where is that line? And what is the perception of the individuals who are there? One individual could be thinking, look, they could pick someone up and their hand goes in a certain area, and now all of a sudden they've touched them in a place that would indicate some sexual advance, where it may be the case that it is completely innocent and may be done in the belief, and we'll say in the part of a man, because we're talking about a man versus a woman situation, where the man believes that these advances are encouraged. He may be wrong. And even on that committee, Senator Cory Booker has admitted that he himself in high school had groped or touched inappropriately a female and was slapped as a result, and then continued to make his advances until it appears as though maybe he realized what he was doing and he stopped. If he was in the state of Maryland, which I believe is where the incident allegedly occurred with Brett Kavanaugh, where there's no statute of limitation, Cory Booker could be charged with that assault today. But I believe this happened when Cory Booker was in high school. And I believe that he maintained a relationship with that female in a friendly way thereafter. But still, if those advances were not sought, it is still a sexual assault. Now, Cory Booker seems like a very intelligent man. He happens to be a Democrat, and I don't like some of the things that the Democrats do, but I certainly could value and appreciate his sincerity, or what appears to be sincerity, on dealing with some issues. He's a smart man. Now, Mr. Booker, I don't think that you would want to have your career ended because of that assault that occurred when you were very young and with no serious intent, I will guess, of seriously hurting or violating that young woman. However, if that young woman didn't slap you, how much further would you have gone? We don't know these things. Maybe you don't even know these things. But when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh, it seems as though, even though the information cannot be verified, and certainly Judge Kavanaugh denies it, he is supposed to be held accountable for something that could have been relatively innocent. And we all know that the types of things that happened there, depending upon what the degree was, and one person can feel as though they're being held down, and another person can feel as though we're just kind of fooling around and wrestling. And so it's completely legitimate for someone to say, no, I didn't do that. I didn't assault that woman, because that was not the intent of the individual there. And that behavior in other circumstances could be completely legitimate and even sought. In the case of Cory Booker, I don't suggest that we go back and we say, you are a bad person because you were young and you did something that nature drives us to do. Females and males think and act differently. We know that females dress provocatively, they act provocatively, they have their own goals in life. But the drive to mate, I'll use that term, is probably the most fundamental drive in human existence. It's so powerful that when we look at living things that don't have a conscience, we see that in an elk, for example, a male elk, a bull elk, will virtually stop eating in order to pursue his harem of females. Maybe even becoming so weak from not eating enough for so long that in a hard winter it costs him his life. This is what we as human beings are about. Luckily, hopefully we have a conscience, we have a standard, we have learning that draws certain lines. But do not make the mistake of thinking that these forces should not be considered when we're talking about behavior between a man and a woman. I encourage members of the committee, and I encourage Ms. Ford, to treat people as you wish to be treated, in the sense of understanding that even if you, Ms. Ford, believe that that was his objective, and you may have very good reason to believe that, understand that in his view, he may not have believed that he was hurting you, scaring you, or doing anything that you really didn't want to have happen. That's in his mind. We would have to go back those 35, 36 years in order to determine what that is. But just like Cory Booker and Senator Booker, I want you to vote for Brett Kavanaugh, because you know that his life has been focused on being the best he could be in the areas of law. And everybody seems to agree about that. But I would like you to set your personal drive, whatever it is, to defeat him. And I believe it would be because you're concerned about the decisions he would make on the court. But I want you to set that aside, and I want you to judge him as a human being who, like you, may have made a decision that should have been made a little differently. Having said that, I'm only approaching that from the perspective of understanding, even if it did happen, he could not, and we allow Ms. Ford to have these repressed memories that she can't remember. It's possible, and I think the experts would agree, it's possible that he doesn't remember it. And he could certainly tell you that did not happen when indeed it could have happened. And we likely will never know. But this presumption of innocence, for you, Senator Booker, the presumption that, yes, you did these things, and you had occasion to go ahead and admit them, but you remembered them. if this incident occurred, if Brett Kavanaugh really does not have a memory of that, then would you want him to admit something that he doesn't recall? And you know, and the experts know, that when we don't recall something, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Even if we say, no, that didn't happen, it's possible that it had. I want to address a situation that happened with Senator Flake from Arizona. He left the hearing room. He was confronted in an elevator. The individuals who confronted him kept the elevator from moving. They actually imprisoned him, so to speak, and kept him captive, which is, by the way, against the law, because they wanted to have a say about what he should do in voting in that courtroom, or correction, in the committee hearing room. And they went on about not caring about all women. One woman mentioned her daughters. I wish Senator Flake would have said, do you have sons? Do you care about your sons? If they were accused of something and no one could prove the allegation, would you want them to lose everything that they've worked for in their life because of an allegation? The fact of the matter is, I would hope that that woman would say no. And we are not talking about simply a woman who may or may not have been assaulted. We're talking about the other individual who, at least in his adult life, has been very, very responsible. Did he drink? Was he falling down drunk? Heaven knows that if that was a standard for deciding people's responsibility and what they should do in the future, many of us would be in great trouble. I've got to wrap this up, but I want you to know that this is a very, very important issue that you're dealing with. And there are dangers in not addressing the truth of the matter, and it's more complicated than we know. Facts are important, feelings are important, but facts trump feelings. And that's what we need to go by. That's what Senator Flake needs to go by. He needs to vote for Judge Kavanaugh, and Mr. Booker, you need to do the same. This is Dan Devlin for the Detective Dan Devlin Show. Honorable people, honorable nation. I hope you are honorable people. God bless you all. Have a great day.